All right, here we go.
Hello, this is Doug.
Doug Woodward, Daniel Ott here.
Hi, Daniel. How are you?
Man, I'm outstanding and sure am looking forward to seeing you this evening. Appreciate you coming on the program.
Hey, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. Am I coming through loud and clear?
Man, you are coming through perfectly. Last week we had Dr. Jim Garrow on, and I told him that as a guest you see me at a green screen. Of course, that's not what the folks see. And I think he said put up a green screen, so he put a green towel behind him. And I didn't say nothing because I like the old guy, especially a beard. I don't know if you know Dr. Garrow, but he got a beard.
Well, I saw the picture on your website, and I grow a beard from time to time, but nothing quite like his.
Well, yeah, he got that ZZ Top thing going on there. I don't think he went after me on that one. But anyway, welcome to the program, Doug. Man,
thank you.
Boy, is this a timely show. We've got so much going on, and you know, you're going along with all the political stuff in the country, you know, the back and forth going on. But meanwhile, you've got Russia over there, and I think they sent half their population in a test run to their civilian underground bases. So they obviously know something is up.
That's a possibility. Yeah, they supposedly 40 million persons participated in drills to pretend that a nuclear war is going to happen, and that's about 20% of their population, if I'm not mistaken. It's a pretty significant drill.
Well, yeah, it's a drill. So I wonder who got the call to the, did they pass out numbers? You know, what did they do?
Yeah, exactly. Every other house or something like that has to go down below underground. I have no idea how they selected them, but it was a very expansive test run for something. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a deal. I can't imagine if you said 60 million Americans were going to go do some type of a drill and go find their way to underground shelters, just exactly how much rebellion we would have on our hands as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Well,
it would be a lot.
I wonder if they've got a Putin Foundation where you contribute to the Putin Foundation and then you get a pass to the underground base.
There's a possibility there. Yeah, there's a possibility. We know in our country only a certain number of elites can afford to spend $1 million to get one of those silos in Kansas that used to be housing intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they've turned those into nice apartments and promised that you'll be safe when the nuclear war or the Holocaust finally comes.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my ranting points, I was pointing out that while the United States has plenty of underground bases for our government officials, I mean, directly from D.C., they've got trains underneath there, man, and elevators going down, so they can instantly go, evacuate the D.C. population. But I say at some point, Doug, if we're left up here to burn, they're going to have to come up out of the hole sometime, and I got a feeling the civilians are going to be waiting for them.
Well, yeah, the ones that are left will be. That's true. So, the amount of the civil defense precautions in the United States are certainly not what they were back in 1960 when the Cuban Missile Crisis was underway. And what's been remarkable, of course, has been that this whole exercise has been going on in Russia, and virtually nothing has been talked about in the mainstream media, the major newspapers, the major networks. They're barely discussing it. Mm-hmm. And so it seems like that whatever the Russians know, apparently the people in power in the United States don't want the people of the United States to know.
Mm-hmm. Well, Russia keeps coming up in the political process here with the hacking of the DNC and the Clinton Foundation. The Democratic Party is blaming Russia for hacking, and it seems there's several trains of thought there. One, that they want Trump to win for whatever reason, or two, they're trying to say, look, if they can hack into our DNC computers and the Clinton Foundation, even get stuff off of Hillary's bleached bit server, then perhaps
33,000 emails.
Then, yeah, maybe they're setting them up as the fall guy to say, well, then they can also hack into the election. Therefore, if Trump wins, they can say the Russians did it and his win is void. So there's several different ways that can go, but they're dragging Russia into our elections cycle.
Right. No, it's Yeah, I've been following that pretty closely, and it's been a remarkable back and forth. Certainly, it has been the case that Hillary all of a sudden decided that the Russians were coming. The Russians were coming, and that they were coming to somehow mess around with the election. It was remarkable. Only about 4 or 5 weeks ago, Obama was practically laughing at the notion that the federal government could have anything to do about rigging the elections. And he was proclaiming, hey, this is all the states. The states run these elections. We federales, we don't do any of that stuff. That's not part of our thing. And then about 6 days later, all of a sudden, he was doing something about it. Oh, there's my wife. She's in the background.
Oh, tell her we say hello. So tell her a lot of people watching.
Daniel says hi. She says hi back.
Well, this is such a friendly show, man. That's good. Maybe she'll grab a mic and help us out a little bit. Give us some intel on you. But anyway, all right. So we're going to be talking about World War III tonight, or are we on the brink? Now, in the 50s, they were underneath they had the nuke drills in the public school system, saying that the threat of nuclear war. I guess it sort of faded away over time. The idea that we need to have practice drills, and then there have been from time to time what we say nuke eruptions, where people say we're 1 second to midnight and you better get ready, and then those kind of disappear. So what makes you come to the conclusion that we are close to a brink? And could you put that on a doomsday clock? At what time to doomsday are we at?
Yeah. Well, right now, I think that virtually all the experts, I was saying this, of course, a year ago and started writing about this. I've written 3 books. We'll talk about each of those a little bit tonight. But I started talking about this a year ago, that I felt like that what was going on in Russia and in the Middle East was moving us closer and closer to what I believe is the next great war in the Middle East, which is the War of Gog and Magog, as we frequently call it, referencing the passages from Ezekiel 38 and 39. And I'm kind of out on a limb with just myself and a few others that believe that, because the majority of evangelicals that study Bible prophecy right now tend to believe the next major event is Psalm 83, the Psalm 83 war. And then there is also a very good number of evangelicals that study Bible prophecy that subscribe to the Islamic Antichrist theory, and Joel Richardson, Walid Shubat, and their view is that there is no distinction between the War of Gog and Magog and the War of Armageddon. And so consequently, they believe the next great war is, in effect, Armageddon. They tend to conflate the Antichrist with Gog. As I said, the Armageddon war with Gog and Magog. And so there's a number of different views. My perspective is that the next great war is an attack by Russia into the Middle East, but the monkey wrench I've thrown into the thinking is that before they do that, they attack the United States. And so I've been writing about that for about 3 years, and have really gone into some real specific detail, playing out a scenario on that in the book that I wrote back in January, The Next Great War in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Now, to get back to your specific question, what's really going on that causes us to worry right now that we may be facing nuclear war? Certainly, it's been tensions that have been mounting in the Middle East. There are so many threads, so many factors in play right now. Certainly one of the biggest ones is the whole issue of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the issue of what the U.S. has been up to in the so-called Arab Spring, the sort of the overturning of a number of traditional American, you might say, puppet governments, whether we're talking Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, who was not really a friend of America, but essentially they were providing. Libya had a stable government. And obviously Iraq, the U.S. moved into Iraq in 2003, 2004, and threw out Saddam Hussein. And then Syria. Syria became really the kind of the crossroads. It became the sticking point where America decided that it was time for Assad to be gotten rid of, that he should no longer be running Syria. And there was just one real big problem when America made that decision. The Syrians happened to have a many decades long association and alliance with Russia. And so Russia said, not so fast. And they came to the aid of Bashar al-Assad. And so then everything got very, very strange when it appeared that the United States government was actually lying to all of us. Not like that they've ever done that before, but they were lying to us about which side really we were supporting. And all of a sudden we find out, and we'll go into this in more detail, no doubt, but we find out that we actually secretly were supporting Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And so much so that this was causing the military, the Pentagon, to have a split with the White House and with the CIA. And so for the last 3 years, there's been a war amongst the American resources in the Middle East. And so that's really played into this. But what's really been happening, it's really been the crux of all this, has been the crisis in Russia. It has been the fall of the value of the ruble. It is only about 15% the value that it had about 5 years ago. You have the fall of oil prices. Oil prices have fallen. I don't know what you're paying. You live in, let's see, is it Ohio where you live? I'm trying to remember where you live.
Indianapolis.
Pardon me? Indianapolis. That's right, Indiana. So I started to say, I don't know what you're paying for gas up there, but here in Oklahoma, where we have a lot of oil and gas, I'm paying around, under $2 a gallon for gasoline.
Yeah, we're about $2.38.
About $2.38. Okay, so we're a little cheaper because we got lots of oil and lots of refineries all around here in Oklahoma, as well as earthquakes. We're the home for fracking, so we do earthquakes right here in Oklahoma. We're now the number one earthquake state in America, and of course, it's not even close, and it's all because of this oil stuff. Mm-hmm. So, nevertheless, so you've got the ruble's crumbling, the oil prices are falling dramatically, and Russia require high oil prices. Why? Well, because 52% of their national revenue comes from the sale of their oil and natural gas. And so they are absolutely crippled if they don't have that revenue. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, so, the crumbling prices, didn't it just wipe out Venezuela?
That has been a big factor. That's right. That's why Venezuela is in the crisis that it is in. And of course, the real situation in America is we always really had enough oil. Mm-hmm. We had oil shale and we had other sources of energy. It's just that the current administration has been forcing us to look at alternative fuel sources when in fact new oil discoveries, the productivity of fracking, it causes a few 4.0 earthquakes, but it certainly does get a lot more oil out of the ground. Mm-hmm. So you got that new oil fields being discovered. So America is in its best position from an energy standpoint in many, many, many decades.
Well, Hillary says if she gets in there, she's going to create 2 million jobs creating solar panels. I only got one word for her. Solyndra.
Okay. So yeah, that's not something I teach entrepreneurship in my day job, and right now getting serious investors to want to invest in alternative fuel sources, new types of batteries, and all that. Probably not the best place to get investors to invest right now. Yeah. So so it's a factor. But anyway, Russia has been on the economic downturn, dramatically so. Their government's hurting, their people are hurting, and in part, what you do if you are the head of a nation and you feel like that you're threatened, what you want to do is you want to create a war, and you want the country to get all behind you. And so certainly Putin has done a masterful job of painting the United States as the enemy, and has got all of the Soviet, well, it used to be called the Soviet Union. Some people would still say really the communists are in control. They're just not called communists anymore. But nevertheless, Russia has mobilized itself, and so everyone's thinking, well, I don't have enough to eat, and what I do have to eat tastes terrible, but, the Americans are going to attack us. So we better, we just better buckle down and buck up, and we just better, make do with what we've got. And so this crisis that's going on in Russia has really been feeding the issues about war, and that's kind of at the heart of it. But there's so much more that we can talk about as it relates to why it is we're on the cusp of potentially a major war.
Oh, so much more. Well, Doug, as you know, we do get questions.
Yes.
And they're just flying in here. So let's get a few of these out of the way here. Here's one from
Sure.
Billy in Indiana. It says, what do you think about the Mandela effect and the changes in the Bible, word changes?
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I assume, what do you think, Daniel? Do you think your audience pretty much knows what that question's about?
Well, they should be. I mean, it's
Okay,
kind of an open door right there. Are you going to go through it?
I just didn't know if I needed to digress to explain what the question's really about. Well, thanks for the question. Not exactly on subject, but I would just say that I have some good friends that have walked me through the whole issue of the Mandela effect. I have to admit that the one that's the most persuasive to me is about Snow White and Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, more so than changes in the King James Bible. Mm-hmm. But, there's a lot of people that are casting about trying to figure out whether it's real or not, mm-hmm. and then wanting to blame CERN and what's going on at CERN in terms of changing the universe. Perhaps we've jumped over into a different universe, and in that different universe, the King James Bible was written slightly differently than the one that we used to exist in, Daniel, just 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I'm not necessarily a real fan or advocate for the Mandela effect or for the flat Earth while we're talking about those things.
I was just going to go there.
Flat Earth, yes.
All right, here we go. And I'm going to add on to this question from John Smith. It says, will the false religion of Islam have anything to do with end time prophecies? But let me ask you something on the idea of Islam. Years ago, in Christendom, a lot of things going around about the 10 kings, the 10 heads, and so therefore right. They sort of said somewhere in Europe, the Antichrist will come. Well, from there are those that says the Antichrist is now Islamic. Now I'm wondering, have they changed their view because of the wave of Islam that's moving over Europe to say that the Antichrist will be Islamic, only to keep up with the changing demographics?
Well, it's kind of I write a bit about this in The Next Great War. America, we do a pretty good job of identifying who our enemy is, and then we tend to. There's a lot of Christians in the United States still, happily, and we tend to just decide, well, that enemy all of a sudden has to be the Antichrist. And so, one time it was Benito Mussolini, then it was Adolf Hitler, then it was Mikhail Gorbachev. And now it's Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey.
Really?
That's the president of Turkey. And the folks that believe in the Islamic Antichrist as the theory about where the Antichrist comes from, they actually believe that he is the Antichrist. And Waleed Shubad is explicit about that. Joel Richardson, who I don't know Waleed, I know Joel to some extent, and have a very good relationship with him, but we certainly disagree on this issue of the Islamic Antichrist. It is a big subject unto itself. I've written extensively. I wrote a specific book on it. It's the most, other than this new book we just released on CERN and on cosmology called Revising Reality, I wrote a book specifically called Mistaken Identity, the case against the Islamic Antichrist. And in that book, I talk very specifically about 10 reasons why I do not believe that the Bible supports the theory of the Islamic Antichrist. Because it's important to realize that it's not just is the Antichrist perhaps a Muslim. It's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes along with that scenario. It is, as I said earlier, the idea that Armageddon and Gog and Magog are the same war, that Gog is the same personage as the Antichrist, as the Mahdi, that they're all one and the same. That the whole prophetic scenario is all just what happens in the Middle East. The rest of the world doesn't count. It's the view that the Muslim nations, the Islamic nations, can attack Israel, and while they're attacking Israel, Russia, the United States, Europe will just sit on their hands and do nothing. And that is not a view that seems to fit very well with the realities of geopolitics. And so I've challenged Joel. We've debated the subject, even have a DVD where we debated together on this, that's available on my website if people want to go out and look at that book, Mistaken Identity, and then look at the DVD on the Islamic Antichrist debate I had with Joel Richardson. So could the Antichrist be Muslim? Yes. Is the Islamic Antichrist as a whole theory or scenario likely to be true? I don't believe so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's see what this next question is. Have you ever seen the YouTube video, Why Everything You Hear About Aleppo is Wrong?
I haven't seen that. Now, I don't know exactly what's behind that question. I certainly know that right now Aleppo is the big kind of the tip of the spear. It's the big issue. Aleppo is the last major Syrian city that is being held by ISIS, and it's under assault by Assad's Syrian regulars, we might call them, the official Syrian army. Mm-hmm. It's been the point at which, about 2 weeks ago, America supposedly, mistakenly bombed and killed about 80 Syrian troops and probably a number of Russian special forces, Spetsnaz individuals, commandos that were probably there as well. And there's been quite a ruckus about that whole thing, whether or not it was really intentional, what happened, or in fact, whether it was an accident. And so there's a lot of debate going on about that. Now, again, I don't know exactly what the question's asking, but it is true to say that right now the focus of the fighting is on Aleppo.
Mm-hmm. It seems that President Obama really wants and Hillary Clinton want Assad out. But how bad is Assad?
Yeah, well, his father had a relationship with the old Soviet Union. Syria has been a major partner of Russia. To answer that question, you kind of have to dig into some of the history of the Middle East, especially what's been going on. But I will give you my theory. My theory is that Barack Hussein Obama, as well as Hillary Clinton, were schooled under a very radical Marxist guy named Saul Alinsky. And Alinsky believed, as has been the case with back in the 60s and 70s when the United States was experiencing so much calamities on the college campus with the Black Panthers, Students for a Democratic Society, the whole Kent State affair, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. You remember that song that they sang about Kent State? Four dead in Ohio.
We'll sing it.
Yeah.
4 dead in Ohio.
Yeah, in Ohio. Yeah. Well, that whole issue was all about what's really going on. Is America in fact doing evil in the world, and was the Vietnam War justified? I think now most everyone realizes that the Vietnam War was probably a very bad idea for us to be involved in. Nevertheless, the issue was whether the Chinese, communists, the Russians were in fact going to conquer the world, and there was a lot more concern back then that they were. It's a lot different now. Once the Berlin Wall fell, and a couple of years later when the Soviet Union fell, then it looked like that the enemies were all gone, and NATO should have just been dissolved, but NATO continued on. And of course, there's been more and more debate. That's been one of the issues that Hillary and Trump have debated about whether or not we should still be supporting NATO. And it's because we didn't have an enemy. But the issue is do we really have a sufficient enemy with ISIS or Al Qaeda? Or do we, in the form of, or do we need to generate a more traditional enemy, such as Russia, to be able to justify the huge amount of money that's spent on defense? And so the issue of the military-industrial complex, the money that's spent there, that really looks like that has become one of the major points of what's going on in the world right now, and could be, in fact, what's behind the whole run up to World War III. And it's just it gets back to dollars and cents, and to some extent it gets back to greed. So anyway, I think I didn't quite get the answer to the question, but you had America traditionally was supported and was supporting dictators. Whether we were talking about dictators like Allende in Chile, or in effect dictators like Mubarak in Egypt, Gaddafi. And I believe that Clinton and Obama wanted to eliminate the vestiges of the old American kind of quasi right-wing fascist sort of foreign policy, get rid of all these dictators and have them all overthrown. Originally, we hoped that the Arab Spring was a genuine break towards democracy.
It was more like an Arab nightmare, though, isn't it?
It's become more of a nightmare as all of these former American leaders leaders in the Middle East that favored the United States have fallen. Even Gaddafi, who, again, we did not really love a whole lot. The CIA actually was very much involved in overthrowing Gaddafi. And so you've had all of these leaders thrown out. I believe it's because it is still sort of a residual effect of the teaching of Saul Alinsky, and trying to, and the hatred that the radicalization or the radical left had in the 60s and 70s towards the sort of American fascist kind of foreign policy. So I think that's been a big part of what's
let me ask you, is the Middle East better because Gaddafi is not there?
No, it's far worse.
Didn't he bring some sort of stability over there?
Yeah, that's the issue, and that's what Trump argues now, that he was against the war in Iraq because he says now, whether it's true or not is another question. He says that he knew that we would destabilize the region. That in fact has been what has occurred when we went in, and this is not just a Democrat issue. This is a Republican and Democrat issue. This is American foreign policy, especially with the Bushes, what we call the neocons, as well as the Democrats. And what we've seen in American foreign policy in the Middle East, really since 1991, the first Gulf War, we've seen that Americans basically want to drive and control I apologize, I got a cold, and dictate what's really happening in the Middle East. And we've wanted to, after the Soviet Union crumbled, we've wanted to flex our muscles and be the single world power that Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski said that we were. and we are the only world power, so we should basically call all the shots. And so we've been trying to take apart the alliances that Russia had with Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah, and so forth. And so that's been one of the backstories to this whole affair. And so it's the Mideast now is chaotic, and that's when we pulled everyone out of Iraq in 2011. Although Al Qaeda was still there, ISIS had not even been officially christened yet. And when we pulled all of our troops out of Iraq, that's when ISIS really came about. It came about based upon what was going on in Iraq at the time. Don't know if you want to get into all this detail, but it really was an alliance of the Sunnis that were dispossessed because they were being attacked and killed by the Shia, who had just come into power with the new Iraqi government that was put into place by the U.S. And then you had the former Hussein military, the Baathists, that knew how to operate all those weapons that we just left behind. Right. And so you had this alliance between the Sunnis and the Baathists, and that's really what formed ISIS. And if we had left 20 to 30,000 troops in Iraq, that would not have happened. In this whole nightmare scenario that's occurred since about 2008, but especially since 2011, it would not have come about the way that it has.
Let's get something clear here.
Okay.
Exactly who is Gog and who is Magog? Let's start with the basic here. Okay.
Well, I can tell you who I believe they are. I believe Gog is a prince, and I believe Magog is a land. And I happen to believe that Gog is a principality, just like the Prince of Persia or the Prince of Grecia, talked about in Daniel, the book of Daniel. I happen to believe that Gog is a principality or power that will empower a particular Russian leader. And if it were to happen today, that Russian leader would be Vladimir Putin, more than likely. I happen to believe Gog is a spiritual power that is in control of that part of the world and those peoples. And so that's my point of view. Now, Joel Richardson would tell you that Gog from Ezekiel 38:39 is, in fact, a Muslim, and that he is more than likely a Turk. He is nicknamed the Assyrian in the Old Testament. And boy, oh boy, does this get into some detailed discussions. And you've had a chance to look at some of my PowerPoints, I know, and the whole historical analysis of the nations of the Middle East and who migrated where and all that. It's a big issue. It's a big part of the story. So I happen to believe Gog is the Rosh. Gog is the prince of the Rosh, or the Russians. That Russia is the land of the Rush. And as I've taken pains in my books to point out, there's a lot of ancient historians that I have cited that argue in support of that. It is more of the traditional view. Hal Lindsey, Grant Jeffrey, Thomas Ice. There's a lot of folks that argue that Gog is Russia, but the Islamic Antichrist argues that it's not, and that it's essentially Assyria and Turkey, and predominantly Turkey. Okay,
so as far as Gog goes, you're saying it is a spiritual prince that represents Russia?
I believe that's correct. I believe Gog is a prince.
Is that sort of in, like the prince of the power of the air, like
yes,
like we're in the book of Daniel, where it said there was the
Prince of Grecia, the Prince of Persia.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I believe this is the Prince of Gog. In effect, is a power principality. Remember, Paul talks about that we battle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, thrones and dominions, powers of the air. I happen to believe that, for instance, I believe that there is a power principality of Babylon. I happen to believe that power principality controls the United States. and I happen to believe that his name is Lucifer.
Okay, but
I'll just let that settle in for a moment.
well, I was going to say, does he, the United States particularly, or does it control all nations?
Well, I happen to believe that that Babylon. If you Michael Heiser, I don't know if you're familiar with Michael. He's recently written a book called The Unseen Realm, and in the book, and we talk about this quite a bit in Revising Reality, that there was a time in the book of Genesis, the Table of Nations. It's referenced several times in other books in the Old Testament, but it appears that humankind was divided up into initially divided up by the three sons of Noah to go into different directions to replenish and multiply and populate the earth again, which was God's commandment and then Noah's commandment to his sons. And that at not long after in fact, probably almost exactly at the time of the Tower of Babel, when the confusion of tongues occurred, that the children of Adam, the children really of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, that they were divided up based upon the different language groups. And according to Psalm 82, Psalm 89, and some other places in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, it appears that God organized all of humankind and assigned members of what's known as the Divine Council, 70 members of the Divine Council that are at least angelic spirits, but could possibly are more powerful than your average everyday angel, and actually are responsible for the different peoples and the different nations. And this is we only know of a couple of those names in Scripture, such as we've talked about, Prince of Grecia, Prince of Persia. But it's very likely that Babylon itself had its own power, and I happen to believe that the spirit of Babylon today is incarnated mostly in the United States. Gets into the whole subject of Mystery Babylon versus the Daughter of Babylon, and that, of course, itself is a pretty controversial discussion.
The spirit of Babylon would you also consider that a prince?
Yes, I would, and I happen to believe that's the top dog. I believe the Bible in many respects is the tale of two cities. It's the tale of Jerusalem, the holy city, and it's the tale of Babylon, the city that stands for the power of humankind rebelling against God. And I suspect that Satan himself is responsible for administering Babylon.
Okay. All right. Got this question from Terry Kennedy. Is Islamism satanic?
Is Islamism satanic? I happen to believe that it is. That's not to say that all Muslims are satanic. I happen to believe that the doctrines are doctrines of demons. I happen to believe that any religion that denies the messiahship of Jesus Christ is not in keeping with the revealed truth in the Scripture. And so, yes, and certainly we see some flavors of Islam that are constructive, but we see many flavors that are destructive. And certainly ISIS is the most destructive force that we've seen. According to some of the Islamic experts, every few hundred years there grows a group within Islam that becomes especially radicalized, and this is the group that exists now. And whether or not they will persist much longer is perhaps being decided even as we talk, depending upon what happens in Aleppo and then what happens with the group of ISIS that's formed in Lebanon.
Well, in
Libya.
With some of your opinions, now that the UN has taken over the internet, that might be considered hate speech.
It might be, and who knows? Maybe they'll take turn my volume off on my microphone while we're talking. I don't know.
Okay. We got this question from Nathan. He says, will the false religion of Judaism have anything to do with end-time prophecies?
The false religion of Judaism, will it have anything to do with end-time prophecies? Well, certainly from a biblical standpoint, a traditional view of, I would say, the dispensational view suggests that Israel is yet to recognize that Jesus is their Messiah, and so we interpret the teaching of Paul in Romans 9, 10, and 11, and elsewhere in the scriptures that the Gentiles are to make the Jews envious or jealous. We certainly are familiar with the story of the two witnesses, where we certainly believe that there's also this 144,000 that are supposedly, the traditional view is that they are Jewish evangelists that come to believe in Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and that they are a very dominant force in the Great Tribulation period. We also know in Zechariah, I believe it's Zechariah 14, that it says, it may be Zechariah 12, that the Jews will look upon him whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for their firstborn son. So, as Christians, we are optimistic that as Paul says, one day all Israel shall be saved. And of course, that gets into some interesting discussions. Is it the true Israel? Is it a national Israel? And that, of course, is kind of the dividing line between the dispensational school of thought versus what's also known as the covenantal school of thought. So indirectly, yes, Christians believe that the Jews will, as in Ezekiel 36, there will be a new heart put within them, and that they will come to recognize Jesus as the Messiah.
Doug, I got in my background a cover of your book, Is Russia Destined to Nuke the U.S.? Destined, does that mean God ordained, preordained?
Well, if you look at the prophecies, and you say the prophecies, for instance, specifically the prophecies of Ezekiel 38, 39, we know he wrote those prophecies. He was, along with almost all of Judah, carried away to Babylon. He wrote those when he was in outside of Babylon, in a province not far from Babylon, in about 550 BC. So if we believe that those prophecies were speaking of a future time, and that the destruction that he talked about that would come about on Gog and Magog and the various nations there, and then I talk specifically about what I consider a parenthetical comment in Ezekiel 38, 10 through 13, which I think really references Jeremiah 50 and 51, that does declare that the daughter of Babylon will be destroyed in the last days. And the book we wrote, myself, Doug Krieger, Dean McGriff, a few years ago, The Final Babylon, we talk about the evidences for the United States being the daughter of Babylon. John Price wrote a book called The End of America. John, I was privileged to have him write the foreword to my book, The Next Great War in the Middle East. He agrees with me that the United States likely will be attacked prior to the beginning of the Great Tribulation. And so the answer to the question is yes, I think that it has been predestined to occur. And that doesn't excuse the agency of humans that make decisions. And the Bible is full of sort of ironies like this, or antinomies, as Paul is talking about when he's talking about Israel deciding for or against Jesus. He quotes the scripture and says, behold, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. And that was quoting God. Now, God didn't really hate Esau, but he favored Jacob as the lineage through which the Messiah would eventually come. And so it seems to have been predestined.
Okay, and we have this question here. Who actually destroys Babylon?
Well, the scenario I paint, and my scenario could be wrong, I distinguish to some extent the daughter of Babylon, which is talked about in the Old Testament, Jeremiah 50, 51. It's also mentioned Jeremiah 47, Isaiah 13, I believe it is, Psalm 137. You see this phrase, the daughter of Babylon. Myself, a slew of others. I cite maybe a dozen other fairly significant authors that believe that America is the daughter of Babylon. I believe Mystery Babylon is more comprehensive, that it exists throughout time, throughout the time period from Adam and Eve forward, more or less. As soon as Babylon, the city, existed, Mystery Babylon has existed. I believe Mystery Babylon will persist into the tribulation period. I happen to believe the daughter of Babylon, that is the biggest and baddest incarnation of Babylon at this moment, is the United States. I think it will be taken out of the way by Russia. So I believe, and I have been on record as saying, I believe Russia will conduct a first strike against the United States. I think there's strong evidence from Ezekiel 38, 10 through 13, that it will also attack London, and that Saudi Arabia will be taken out as well by the Iranians, and will eliminate the petrodollar as the currency. Russia itself and its Islamic alliance partners, Ezekiel is very clear, they will be destroyed. Now, these events may happen a few months apart, but as I believe they take out the United States first to allow them the opportunity to come against Israel, because Israel would then not have its primary military protection that it has today, even if Obama is not seemingly a good friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel still just signed a $38 billion military pact with the United States. Obama may have his point of view, but there's the military-industrial complex, and they happen to have their point of view, and their point of view counts more than the president's. Okay. And anyway, so I see Russia attacking the United States sometime, and that's partly why I'm so worried about what's going on right now.
Okay. All right, Doug, we're at the top of the hour. We'll take about a 5-minute break. Anything you'd like to say about your books or your website links? You just go right ahead.
Sure. I've renamed my website doomsdaydoug.com. It's easier for people to remember, doomsdaydoug.com. So it's got lots of videos, lots of articles. I write 1 or 2 articles a week. All the books are up there. All my PowerPoints are up there. So if folks want to drill down, just as you had a chance to look at a couple of my PowerPoints, you can go find them. And it goes into all this in great detail. So I'd encourage people to do that. Yeah,
your PowerPoints are awesome, Doug. Everybody should go there. Go to the links on our website there. Get to your website. Go to those links, because they're easy to read. You got it laid out so easy, and you go back and forth and not get lost. It's great. But one question about Doomsday Doug graphic: is that a clown?
That is a mushroom cloud. That is also a clown.
Mushroom.
Yes. So it's a little cynical, and I apologize for that. But a marketing guy got a hold of me and told me that if I want people to actually remember who I am and know how to find me, that it's a good idea to do something like that.
Okay. All right, Doug, just stay on the line. We'll be back with you in about 5 minutes.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, everybody. All right, everybody, this is the Edge Television broadcast, and on our newsmaker line tonight is Doug Woodward, and he'll be right back here in about 5 minutes. We're going to take a break, and this is Daniel on For the Edge. We'll be right back. Hi, via video Skype, Douglas Woodward, welcome back.
Hey. I'm glad to be here.
All right, glad to have you back on the show in the second hour. Doug, man, first of all, we're having doomgasm here in the first hour, talking about the possibility of World War III. Help us through this doomgasm in the second hour a little bit. I was reading a lot through your PowerPoint presentation, and help me to understand, in a rapture scenario, where does that come in through the nuke fest?
Yeah. Well, this is my scenario. I happen to have a few brethren that agree with me. I am a pre-trib person. Now, I'm not, I would describe myself as a pre-tribulational believer. I'm not dogmatic about it. That is where I come down. I have many good friends that are pre-wrath, and friends like Doug Krieger I wrote a book with, who's basically post-trib. I'm very happy to break bread with all of those brethren. But I still come down upon the view that Christ will he will bring out his church prior to the day of the Lord, and I actually developed a scenario that I think makes sense. It's one that a gentleman named Douglas Berner, another Doug, supports. John Price, who wrote the foreword to my book, The Next Great War in the Middle East, he's supportive of it. And it really ties into the issue of earthquakes, the earthquakes that are talked about at the end of Ezekiel 38, Revelation chapter 6. And another good brother, David Lowe, who wrote a book called Then His Voice Shook the Earth, which talks about the trumpet, the last trumpet, what it might be, references the trumpet that blared so loudly that the children of Israel were scared to death and begged Moses to make the trumpet stop sounding when they were on the Holy Mount. So, long story short, I happen to believe that as Russia is firing missiles at America, that there is a good chance that those that are believers will be raptured at that moment. As J.R. Church said, the late J.R. Church, as we are making our way into the heavens, the missiles themselves will be nipping at our heels.
Wow. Man, I hope the trip is rather fast. By the way, everybody, I mentioned a couple times, I guess, Dr. Knowles, not a doctor. He is a doctor. He's an anesthesiologist. He just doesn't claim to be an expert in the field of Parkinson's disease, but he has extensive research, and it'd be good to see what he brings to the table. Okay, let's get to a couple more questions there, Doug, and here's one for you. It says that the Bible says God will let the Antichrist change time and laws. Is that not an example of the Mandela effect?
Well, it could be. Depends on how one wishes to observe that. You know, in the French Revolution, they kind of came up with a new calendar. They came up with the metric system, and they were very much about changing the dates, the holidays, and the French Revolution, one could argue, was a pretty antichrist revolution. And Madame Guillotine off with their heads. That sort of reflects things that are talked about in the book of Revelation. Yeah. So there's a number of different ways to think in terms of changing times and laws. So the answer, I would say, is that yes, we'll see that fulfilled, but exactly how that's fulfilled, it's not very obvious to me.
Okay. And let's get to this other question. This is from Philip in Georgia. Why is Jordan stable, and why is Lebanon not in a civil war?
Well, of course, Lebanon has been in a civil war to a great extent for quite some time. Hezbollah has been running the country for the most part with Iranian support. So Hezbollah is predominantly a Shia religion. You might say that Shia religion is what underlies their point of view. So you really have kind of a Shia crescent. It's what it used to be called the Fertile Crescent. It's now called the Shia Crescent because you've got Hezbollah in Lebanon. You've got the Shia you have the Alawites that are a Shia, another sort of Shia faction in Syria. Then you have Shia that are running the government in Iraq, and then you have the Shia in Iran. So all across the northern Middle East, you have Shia. Now Jordan is a much more moderate. I could be mistaken, but I believe it's Alawite as well. But it is not Wahhabist. The Saudis are in the Wahhabist of Saudi Arabia are the most radical Sunnis. They are radical Sunnis, and they are more radical than the Shia of Iran. And so 60 Minutes, in fact, had an interview on just a week or two ago with King Hussein of Jordan, and he talked about this and talked about the nature of radicalism in Islam, and so essentially you have royal parties like King Hussein, the House of Saud in Saudi Arabia, that have run their countries with typically British support for over 100 years, and they have maintained control. You had other parties that were being supported by the United States, we talked about earlier, such as Egypt, to a lesser extent Libya, Iraq, and so forth. And so the real issue is just that Jordan is a more moderate Islamic nation, and it has a lot of Western influence and has had for a century, and they've managed to stay away from the radical Shia and the radical Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of different groups over there, and I'm glad that at least you can keep them straight. I sure as heck can.
But, it's hard.
But let me ask you something. I asked you about Babylon, and some part of the prophecies say that there's a great wealth in Babylon. Does that mean that Trump will make America wealthy again just before we get nuked?
Well, Babylon, it's talked about, that there is great wealth. Revelation 16, 17, 18, where Babylon is described. It talks about how Babylon is destroyed in 1 hour, and all the merchants of the world lament and basically throw ashes on their head. Babylon, Babylon, how it's fallen. It's really quoting from Isaiah, which also says the same thing, Babylon, Babylon. It was a great nation. It was a merchant nation. One of the things we do in the Final Babylon is we actually trace the relationship between Tyre and Sidon, Tarshish, Carthage, the merchants of Tarshish, with the Western Europeans and Americans.
Can I bring you back to my question?
Oh, please! I was veering off the point. Go ahead.
Because I'm thinking that with a $20 trillion debt, if Hillary Rodham gets in there, she's going to add another 20 trillion. So that'll make that would obviously not cause Babylon, if we're Babylon, to be prosperous and wealthy. But Trump might make America wealthy again. So I'm just saying, from whoever can make America wealthy is more closer aligned to that Babylonian prophecy, are they not?
Well, this is my day job, finance. The American debt, the $20 million debt, as long as the American military exists to support the petrodollar, as long as the petrodollar is the reserve currency, it doesn't matter how much debt we have. It literally does not matter. The debt is a show. It's a show game, and the congressmen debate it primarily as a political platitude. Mm-hmm. It is not like you and I being in debt. Central banking just doesn't work that way. Central banking invents money, and America's bank is the American Federal Reserve is the most giant Ponzi scheme ever invented. So America can continue to print money as long as the rest of the world will support it. Daniel, when it comes to where people want to put their money, other nations, the rich people, they still line up to buy U.S. Treasury bonds, and they pay less than 2% for bonds that are 10 years old. And we're seeing nowadays we're beginning to see things like negative interest rates. Which what that means is that if you put $10 in my bank, I promise you that a year from now you'll have $9. Wow. So losing only $1 is a negative interest rate, and you're basically saying, gee, I love that deal because if I put it anywhere else, I'll probably only have $7.
That's close to, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Here's a question. It says, in respect to Scotty Clark's Revelation 12 picture in PDF, is the sign on the September 23rd, 2017, the rapture with a great earthquake at the sixth seal?
Could be. Scotty Clark's done some terrific work. I've studied that a bit, and it's certainly conceivable. Um, I think we're always caught between this. No one will know the day nor the hour, and yet at the same time, the Bible seems to be very specific that God's providence, God works in patterns, and he uses numbers, and he has a calendar, the Jewish calendar, and things tend to get fulfilled in accordance to it. So, is that a potentially significant date? Could it be the rapture? Yeah, but Pentecost in the spring is also a very logical time for the rapture as well. It was the beginning. It's when the law was given. Was at a Pentecost when Moses brought down the Ten Commandments. That dispensation began at that time. Obviously, the dispensation of grace began at a Pentecost. When the Holy Spirit came, the dispensation of grace began at a Pentecost. It's very possible that at a Pentecost, the church will be taken out just as it was created on that date. So it is the date of harvest. And so we don't know for sure, but it's very interesting. And when so many things, literally stars align, as they are in the constellations, the woman with the moon and stars at her feet and so forth, it gets my attention.
Okay. We got this question here. It says, if Russia attacks the USA, do we rebuild, then suffer worse destruction when Babylon is destroyed later?
Well, as I said, the way that I come at that is that I see Mystery Babylon. I see the daughter of Babylon destroyed, and I see a Mystery Babylon continue on. I think eventually Mystery Babylon is destroyed too, but it may not be destroyed until literally Jesus returns. The only time that hallelujah is used in the New Testament is when Mystery Babylon is destroyed. And it's used, I think, 3 times. Hallelujah. The walls are come tumbling down. So I see the daughter of Babylon distinguished from Mystery Babylon. I see Mystery Babylon as more of a spirit, a prevailing ethos condition of humankind rebelling against God. And I see, that's why we called it the final Babylon, is that there have been many Babylons, and there will be 1 or 2 more. I think we live in one right now, and I think that after the United States is gone, I believe the Antichrist will arise either from England or from Germany. And I think there's some fascinating things. In one of my PowerPoints, you may have noticed where I talk a bit about the Assyrians, the fact that they were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and they migrated to Germany. And the Assyrians have been the perennial enemies of the Jews since really the 8th century BC. And so I think there's some real interesting things going on there, especially as we look at the political games that Germany's playing right now, where they're trying to be cozy with the Russians, they're trying to be cozy to some extent with the French, but they're not really providing real leadership in the whole squabble between Russia and the United States.
Doug, am I going too far? Because I read that, talking about the blonde-haired, blue-eyed. It kind of reminded me of what's an alien species known as the Nordics. I'm just wondering, It's not them, is it?
No, I don't think it's the Nordics. I think they're different. But that is when the Germans were talking about the Aryan race, back in the 1920s and 1930s. America actually led the charge there in the whole eugenics thing, and we called them the Nordics. So my daughter happened to marry a Nordic, and my grandson is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, so I guess that's a good thing.
Wow. All right. And here's a question from Diana. She wants to know, how should we pray or command Satan over our country? Is there any spiritual defense that we can muster against these hordes?
Well, yeah, I believe we can. I believe that we should be praying for our country, and we should be praying against the powers that would control our country, control our leaders, control our Congress, that we should be beseeching the Lord to break those powers. I think that just as we, in effect, pray against Satan and against evil in individual lives, that we should be praying specifically that the power of Satan would be bound.
Now, is that going to delay things, or is it going to reduce his power and his devastation wreaked upon the USA?
It probably will speed things up if we do not pray. So yeah, perhaps it would delay things. We should be praying that all those to whom the Lord is bringing his salvation, that they will all be redeemed, and that we will have as much time as necessary to get everyone in the lifeboat that is destined to get into that lifeboat.
Mm-hmm. Destined. Uh-oh. So now,
I have a little Calvinism in me. I do.
So, well, in whom we are predestined. Okay, I got that one. Okay.
Yeah, we all, we're predestined to be conformed to the image of Jesus Christ.
Okay. Well.
So says Romans 8. That's really what predestination means. We're predestined to be glorified and predestined to conform to the image of Jesus. Election, now that's a different issue.
All right, here's a question from Phil, North Carolina. Do you think Mystery Babylon could mean the entire world and the system that has been set up in place, and it's led by Satan? So he's saying, is it a global thing?
Exactly. Yeah, well said. Whoever asked that question, let's give him or her a gold star. That's exactly what I believe.
Wow. Okay. Bingo, Phil, North Carolina. And let's get to this question from Philip. Says from Georgia, wasn't Babylon the capital of Assyria? Are the Assyrians descendants of one of Lot's daughters?
Okay, well let's try to think through that. The capital of Assyria was actually Nineveh, and Nineveh is today's Mosul, although Nineveh was destroyed. But you remember Jonah, that's where Jonah went to prophesy, was against Nineveh. And it was the capital of Assyria. Assyria attacked Babylon. Babylon attacked Assyria, and eventually Babylon defeated Assyria in I believe it was about 650 BC, if I'm not mistaken. I could have my dates slightly off there, but the Assyrians had defeated Israel. The famous Jonathan Cahn's discussion about Isaiah 9, 10, and 11. That was the Assyrians defeating northern Israel in 720 BC. And then about 80 years later, I believe it was, when Babylon defeated the Assyrians. And the Assyrians were eventually sort of driven out of that area. Babylon took control, and the Babylonians reigned until the Medes and the Persians at that great banquet Belshazzar. When the Medes and the Persians came, they stopped up the Euphrates River, and they snuck under the gates and took over the whole city and the empire basically in one night.
Hey, got a question here from Cleet. It says, with the posturing of the U.S. from threats from the chief of the army to the congressional hearings discussing attacking Russia, and our actions in the Middle East, is it possible we are inviting a nuclear first strike on America?
We certainly are. I actually wrote an article. It's on my website a couple of weeks ago. People want to go look out under my blogs. I actually wrote an article, 6 reasons why America might do a first strike on Russia. And I don't think we will, but Vladimir Putin and the Russians have always believed that America intended to take out Russia and to conduct a first strike against Russia. And recently, we have seen American military persons, and if I'm not mistaken, even Hillary Clinton, begin to talk in terms of the possibility of using nuclear weapons without, in other words, really using them offensively. They've always been seen as a defensive weapon of last resort. But because two things. One, the yields, they can literally dial a yield. They can dial exactly how big they want the nuclear explosion to be on a particular missile. And because they can target them so precisely now, the military believes that they're usable weapons. And so there's even a report I saw on an unconfirmed and not necessarily reliable source that the American military is preparing itself right now for the use of tactical nuclear weapons in the Middle East and potentially in Eastern Europe, and that there is, of course, discussion about the possibility that the Russians may, in fact, conduct a surprise first strike. So that is going on. But by some of the things that we've been saying, not just John Kerry, but I think it was John Kirby, who's one of the under-secretaries of state. There's also a general that I think spoke just a day or two ago and talked about how we would, basically beat the Russians worse than anyone has ever beaten them before.
Scary talk there. Hey,
scary.
Let me ask you something. Are you watching the show, or are you just seeing me on the green screen?
I just see you on the green screen.
Okay, well, you're not going to see this, but I'm going to play this here. Let me make an adjustment to the programming here, because I'm
going to sip some of my tea while you do that. Then
so do. What kind of tea are you drinking? Is it organic?
No, this is blueberry tea,
really?
So it's non-caffeinated.
Okay.
And I'm doing this because I've been having a lot of coffee in the last week with my cold.
Okay. All right. What I'm going to play here is something called a drone flyby of Damascus, and people can watch this now. And I'm out of the picture. You're out of the picture. Basically, it's a drone flying over Damascus. Have you seen that video on YouTube?
I have not seen that particular video
It
yet.
absolutely shows a wasteland as this drone is flying, blown out buildings as far as this drone flies. And it looks to me, I think one could easily describe it as a ruinous heap. Now you would recognize
Isaiah
that.
17.
Right. And you would recognize that, and our astute listeners would recognize that. Is the fact that Damascus is a ruinous heap a marker in time, a biblical signature of a point where we are in Bible prophecy?
I think that it is conceivably, absolutely a possibility. There are those that believe they have, they've been arguing now Israel is going to attack Damascus with a nuclear bomb. Mm-hmm. I don't know that that's necessarily true. In fact, I do not agree with Brother Bill Salas, who I respect greatly and consider him a friend, but I do not agree with him that Israel is going to attack its neighbors. And so I think that what has happened with Damascus and with Syria may be a fulfillment of prophecy, even though the language of Scripture talks in terms of it being in a single day. Mm-hmm. We know that the word day in the Old Testament means many different periods of time.
See, this as I watch this very depressing video, this drone flyby, you can go back maybe 15 years, maybe 20, to Damascus, and you'll see it almost like a westernized vacation spot. I mean, there were people in the streets, there were trees, and for miles and miles and miles, and it describes the Middle East is all they do is blow the crap out of each other, blow up any semblance of civilization, blow themselves into the Stone Age. Why is that a perpetual blown out area over there like this?
Well, it's again, my explanation in short is that this current administration is very against the aforementioned power of the United States residing in the dictators of and the kings of the Middle East. And I happen to agree with those that argue that the current administration is intentionally weakening the United States to make it conceivable that there can be a global government. I don't necessarily believe that President Obama wants to destroy America. I do believe that he wants to weaken it to the point where America will find itself with no choice but to accept the United Nations as the global government. Mm-hmm. And I think that is absolutely what the plan has been.
Yes, and I think everybody on the opposing side of Trump, the anti-Trumpers are celebrating, high-fiving the audio that came out today, but the audio of his locker room talk 10 years ago pales in consideration in comparison. Thank you to the released emails of Hillary today talking about, and her campaign talking about how a one world government without borders in this country, so they can usher in this new. That is way more important. But that is like so far down the line, people can't even hear that. All they want to know is what Trump said. And here's somebody just basically said we're going to destroy the borders and have global governance, and which is way more important.
Yeah, I mean, I have read what Trump said. I haven't heard it. I read today what he said, but I would point out to people that we need to look at what Bill Clinton actually did, how many women he raped. We need to look at how many women Hillary Clinton presumably abused and threatened, because she and Bill have had a marriage of convenience, both of them to achieve political ends. And so Trump is no saint. There's no question.
Right.
He is no saint. But I would venture that if you stack up the sexual abuse and sexual sins of the Clintons compared to Donald Trump, it would be a very unequal balance.
Why do you think so many women's groups do not support the dozen, maybe 24 women? They all have the same story, that he's abused them, he's raped them, he's bit them on the lips, he's had sex with them in the Oval Office. When you're an authority and you take advantage of an intern, that's one of the worst cases. That's almost like child molestation.
Oh, it absolutely is.
But there's no, it's almost like it's a pass. Like those women deserved it because they're in the wrong political party. I don't even get that.
This is my supposition. It's that women are enthusiastic about the prospects of a woman being the president. And they appreciate the fact that Hillary is articulate. She's been a very real political force in this country, for good or for bad. And folks probably know which side I happen to think she's on. And so they are optimistic and hopeful that a woman will become a president. So I think they just look past whatever Bill has done. And they really are not that familiar. I don't think that they've really been told how extensive Hillary has antagonized, threatened, and abused the women that Bill has been responsible for attacking. Well, they don't know that.
Well, see, it's not just that there's this guy over there named Bill. It's her complicit. She's complicit in the cover-up and the retribution against that
Absolutely.
are obviously truthful charges. I mean, he's paid Paula Jones $850,000. You don't pay that unless you're guilty of something, And then the other women, some women are scared. They're not even talking because they feel like they're going to get killed. All right,
exactly. Yes, I agree.
And there is a continuing and rising list of bodies too. I guess the body count's coming back. All right. Yep. So listen, we're talking about. I want to talk to you a little bit about and I'm going to mispronounce this. The hermeneutic.
Which one? Hermeneutic?
Hermeneutic view of history. There's two ways.
A method of interpretation.
Right, the method of interpretation, the two ways, geography and anthropology. Now, explain both, and which side do you come down on?
All right, and I coughed when you were saying that. Was it the hermeneutic as it relates to Bill Salas versus Joel Richardson?
Yeah, that type of thing.
Yeah. Okay. The point I make, and this is in one of the PowerPoints, if folks want to download it and look at it, it's known as officially the geographic correlation theory. And let me see if I can explain this simply. It is that if you look at biblical prophecy and you look at, for instance, Ezekiel 38, where it lays out all these different countries, or if you look at Psalm 83, which of course is the basis for the Psalm 83 prophecy or prophetic scenario.
Hey, Doug, do you have a Trump allergy or what?
I do. I have a Trump allergy and I have a worse Clinton allergy.
Okay, I was going to say she might have a couple of cough drops in her pocket for you. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I actually do have a cough drop in now, so I apologize if people can hear it clattering against my teeth. But anyway, the argument is that it doesn't matter what peoples lived in Assyria or in today's Lebanon or in today's Syria or in Jordan. It doesn't matter what peoples lived in those countries when the prophecies were written, whether that was, for instance, Psalm 83 was written almost 1000 BC. It was written by Asaph, who was David's choir director, basically King David's choir director, and then Ezekiel was written about 550 BC, as I mentioned before. And the issue is whether or not those countries, those locations, are important in the fulfillment of the prophecies today, and whether we just need to look at just those locations or whether we need to consider who the peoples were and where they and the fact that they lived there, 2,000 years ago. Let's take an example. Assyria. We mentioned it earlier. Assyria is essentially northern Iraq. I mentioned Mosul, which was Nineveh. Assyria, when it was the Assyrian Empire in the 8th, 9th century BC into the 6th century BC, or rather 7th century BC, it also had about half of Turkey. This northern portion of Mesopotamia, that was the Assyrian Empire. Now, the Bible talks about and uses the term the Assyrian in several verses, and it seems to be referring to the Antichrist. Now, in fairness, it could be merely referring to Nimrod, to Ashur, Asshur, which is sometimes translated Assyria, and sometimes it's translated Nimrod. All right, so there's this sort of kind of parallelism between Nimrod, Assyria, and Assyria is derivative from the Assyrian ancient peoples. But when one studies the migration of the peoples, the Assyrians, after they were defeated by the Babylonians, they migrated to the north, and they became. It appears that they became the Teutonics, or the Germans, the Germani. Julius Caesar and the Romans referred to the Germans, the Germani, as the ancient Assyrians. And so why that's interesting is if you assume for a moment that the label the Assyrian does in fact refer to Nimrod in times past or to a future Antichrist, then it is hinting that the Antichrist might be a German. Right? And of course, Adolf Hitler was right from that area, and he was a prototypical, he was the archetype of the Antichrist that certainly most of us understand. So then another issue is, for instance, Bill Salas talks about in Psalm 83, the tents of Edom. Well, the Edomites are, many of your listeners will know where Petra is. It's sort of it's in Jordan, but it's very close to the Gulf of Aqaba. The Israelis don't call it Petra; they call it Selah, Selah, which we see, of course, in the Psalms. In the King James Version, we'll see Selah, which meant pause and ponder. But Petra was also known as Mount Seir. Seir, Mount Seir, or Edom, and that was in effect the children of Esau. All right, so what Bill argues is that the Palestinians, today's Palestinians, are referenced in Psalm 83 as the tents of Edom, Edom, because they live in tents outside of Jerusalem. Well, that is a stretch, because the Palestinians were never Edomites. The Edomites became the Idumeans, or King Herod. Remember King Herod and his sons? They were the kings of Judah when Jesus was alive in Judah. Well, the Edomites have never been the Palestinians or vice versa. They are different peoples. However, there are arguments that the Edomites actually moved to Turkey. And so there is a judgment, Obadiah talks about this, against the Edomites. Many assume the Edomites are all gone, that the Edomites were the Idumeans, and then when Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 135 AD, that the Idumeans, or the Edomites, were dispersed in the diaspora just as the Jews were. Well, perhaps not. And so when one studies the movements and these migrations of these people, which is against, which counters this geographic correlation theory, which actually was originated by Gleason Archer, who's a very famous New Testament scholar. And here's the paradox. The paradox is that Bill Salas and Joel Richardson, both good brothers, they do not agree with each other, and they certainly don't agree with me. But on this one point, the geographic correlation, they agree. They believe that it's not important which peoples lived in those countries back in biblical times. It's only important that those countries exist today, and we just need to be worried about the people that live in those countries today. Well, I disagree, and that's kind of at the hub of the different interpretations about Gog and Magog and the Assyrians and so forth. So it's a little deep. I lay it out pretty well, I think, in the PowerPoints, and so I'd invite people to download the PowerPoint, The Next Great War in the Middle East, and T minus 10 years and counting. Those are the two PowerPoints that I encourage people to download and study. Mm-hmm. And also the book. I mean, The Next Great War in the Middle East goes into this in even further detail, and then a lot of the articles that I've written recently on my website, those are all free, and I encourage people to read those. You'll find those very helpful in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a book cover of your The Next Great War in the Middle East.
Oh, very good.
Up in our background now. People can get that. How do they get that book, by the way?
Number of ways. You can certainly buy it on Amazon right now. It's available from various ministries, Prophecy in the News, Southwest Radio Church, Amazon's, all their distributors. You can buy the ebook, either a Kindle version, or you can buy an iBook from Apple, Lulu, Barnes & Noble, Nook. So those my books are out on all of those different formats, and all of my books, except for the one I've just written, Revising Reality, which is a book on cosmology, with Anthony Patch and Gon Shimura and Josh Peck. That book has not been migrated over or ported over, as we like to say in the software business, to Kindle just yet. But that will be happening in the next few weeks. Okay.
All right. We'll go with that. And then how about this question here? It says, no, I think we asked you that question. All right. So I'm on your website here. I'm on the download on. Let's see what's the name of this. I have to go back to the top to get it. Hang on for a second. Wait, it loads up. Looks like The Next Great War.
Next
now
Great War.
That is downloadable, because now when I click it on an Apple computer, it brings up pictures. Is that?
Yeah. If you'll go down and look beneath those pictures, it'll show you the various files. Usually I've got them set up as PDFs, and because they're so large, I've had to split them in 2 or 3 files. Okay. And so you can just click on those, and then it'll start downloading to your PC. It'll ask you where you want to store the file when you click on it. But, yeah, don't click on the picture. Go beneath the picture, and you'll see the file names.
Okay. All right. And you say in there, a critical passage to analyze, Ezekiel 38:13, is Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all the young lions thereof. Arthur, come take a pray. Why is that critical?
Well, because it really gets down to the heart of the scenario that I paint. I happen to believe that Ezekiel 38:13 is referencing Saudi Arabia, England, and the United States. It's really the Anglo-American alliance coupled with the Saudi Arabians that run the currency of the modern world, known as the petrodollar. You may recall that Nixon basically took us off the gold standard back in 1971, and we made a deal with the House of Saud. We basically promised them we would give them military protection, and in exchange we expected them to dominate the rest of the Arab states as it relates to OPEC and to how oil and gas would be sold. And we basically said, we want you to mandate that only U.S. dollars can be used to buy or sell oil in the international markets. So anytime any of the Mideast states attempt to break the petrodollar, such as Saddam Hussein did, and Muammar Gaddafi wanted to as well. He wanted to go back to a gold standard. He literally was going to create a currency called, get ready for it, the Afro. Wow. And it was going to be a gold-based currency. And likewise, the Iranians, they have wanted to move to the euro as a means to trade, buy, and sell oil. Anytime anyone wants to do that, the United States has a foreign policy. It's called decapitate the leadership or go to war with them. Because it's at the center of our ability to control the world economy. all of the world essentially lets us print all the dollars we want. They line up to buy our U.S. treasuries for one reason. They are paying tribute to the American military. The American military is the policeman of the world, and it is, in effect, a Ponzi scheme. That's why I said earlier that the national debt really it's a misleading issue. It's really not a factor. As long as our military reinforces the petrodollar, then we're golden. But I believe that 2,500 years ago, Ezekiel predicted that the petrodollar was going to be destroyed. And that's why Sheba and Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, which even Brother Bill, who disagrees with me, agrees that is England, and the young lions. And, of course, England is a lion. That's their national emblem. And the young lions are its colonies. And virtually all of the conservative scholars have agreed that probably reflects the United States, that those three nations together are, in fact, going to be taken out. And I argue that the United States is the land of unwalled villages in this passage in Ezekiel 38:10 through 13. And in the book, The Next Great War in the Middle East, I defend it and exegete it very carefully to point out why it is that I argue that, in fact, this is the case.
Okay, well, let me ask something. I asked this question in the first hour regarding the possibility of Donald Trump being the one who makes one of the young lions wealthy, say particularly Babylon, because it does seem that Clinton and Obama are trying to make us poor. Trump is trying to make us wealthy. But on the opposite side of that coin is this scripture right here, which says the land of unwalled villages. And therefore, doesn't that mean Trump won't get elected? Because if he does, there will be a wall.
Very good point. I happen to believe that Donald Trump won't get elected. I happen to believe that Hillary will become the symbolic whore of Babylon. But, we'll see, right? We'll see. I could be wrong, but I've been saying that for about 2.5 years. But, the United States is the most wealthy nation in the world. We run the currency. We are the policeman. We spend over 50% of the monies that are spent on military of any kind by any country. We spend over half the amount of money in the world. And the problem, Daniel, is not that the United States isn't wealthy. It's that you and I aren't wealthy. It's that the folks that are in the middle class aren't wealthy. It's because the wealthy have gotten wealthier, and the poor have gotten poorer, and the middle class have gotten poorer. And so I do, again, this is my day job. I do economics and I do finance and all that. And it's quite amazing how much more poverty has crept into the South, the Southwest, and the Midwest over the past 10 years. And that's why Donald Trump even has a chance, is because of the shifting of poverty away from the Northeast and away from Michigan, let's say, down to the South.
Well, it is clear that the evil powers that be control the executive branch, the judicial branch, the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the IRS, and probably DHS as well. And so if you have that level of evil controlling that many of our gigantic institutions, it is no stretch to say whether Donald Trump wins or not, he's going to lose.
Well, the ability of the White House to control what really happens in the United States in terms of the economy, it's very difficult. The Congress is more important in that respect than the executive branch. And to the extent that the Congress continues to be frozen, inactive, unable to create a budget, unable to agree on how to turn things around, to that extent, the United States will continue to flounder.
Okay, well, Doug Woodward, what do you see in and you're going to get this question about a time frame. What are we looking at? You say in the next 10 years, in the next year? Is there not in one of your PowerPoint presentation slides? It seems that there was an attack of Gog and Magog, and then there was a space of time.
Yep.
So wouldn't we be able to see once the Gog and Magog attack happens that there's going to be a space? I mean, once you see that, then you can prepare for what's coming next.
Yeah, I provide a very specific scenario, and I could be completely wrong, but based upon the analysis I've done and doing, I did a very detailed study, helped along to some extent by Douglas Berner's work, and who I give a lot of credit for. He wrote a book called, it's called The Silence is Broken. The Silence is Broken. Great study written in 2006 about all of the different points of view about Ezekiel and who the nations are and what Ezekiel taught and all that. But nevertheless, I believe I have a presentation called T minus 10 years and counting. So I lay out a scenario of a 10-year period of time in which it begins. The 10 years begin with the attack of Russia on the United States. There is then about a 3 to 3.5 year window in which the world is in turmoil, and from the ashes the phoenix arises, and his name will be Antichrist, and he will no longer have to deal with the Russians per se. There's a very good chance that there will still be some American submarines and some military that has been left. The Antichrist will be a European, I believe, and will come to dominate the world post-rapture, in my view, and post-America, in my view. And that he will then create an alliance protecting Israel, and that will kick off the 7-year tribulation period. So Arnold Fruchtenbaum, really a whole slew of others, Grant Jeffrey, Tim LaHaye, they all believe that there is a destruction, an event of, the Gog and Magog war occurs, and there is a gap between it and the beginning of the tribulation. And I lay all that out, talk about who said what, and point out the timeline and so forth. So I encourage people that are wanting to study this to get the book and read it very carefully, because it covers all of these issues. And but yeah, there's a gap. The 7 years begins, and then the Lord returns basically about 10 years after the Gog and Magog war, in my view.
Mm-hmm. In your PowerPoint presentations, you have...
I've lost the volume.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Can you hear me now? Looks like we're putting out.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I can. Let me see. Yeah, I'm not getting any sound from you.
Can you hear me now? Testing,
so,
1, 2.
I apologize.
It's okay.
Unless you want to hold up a sign with a question,
Wow. Hang on.
Write a question and then I can answer it.
Okay.
I've lost your volume. I hope your listeners are still hearing you.
Okay.
Hi back. How you doing? We're almost done, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. We are.
I've got about 4 or 5 minutes left.
Okay. Well, you can't hear me, so.
I don't know. I don't. If you did sign language, I know a couple of signs. I know that this means turtle. That's about all I know, though.
Okay.
We're waiting for Daniel to write a nice note to me.
Okay.
All right. So let's see. Tell the folks about your website and books. I can do that. All right. So my website is Doom. Oops. Oh, now I see it's popped up here. It looks like maybe that's why. Anyway, hold on a second. So there we go.
Hello.
Now I can hear you.
Wow.
Yeah. For some reason, my computer just decided to turn my volume off. But anyway, my website is doomsdaydoug.com. My books are all available. I have an author. If you go to Amazon and just do a search on S. Douglas Woodward, it'll come up and give you an option to go to my author page. If you go to that page, you'll read all about my books. All the books are there. You can, again, find all my books on Apple iBooks if you're an Appleite. And I would really very much appreciate folks going and taking a look. All the books I've got in paperback as well as on Kindle. Kindle books are usually about half the price of the paperbacks. And right now, The Next Great War in the Middle East is on sale, the Kindle version, for $7.55 is what I noticed Amazon was pricing it at. And they're pricing the paperback at $17.99. So it's on sale. Both those books are on sale, and so forth. So I encourage people to look at the Is Russia Destined to Nuke the U.S.? Is a study of Eastern Europe, Crimea, the Ukraine, still very valid. That is still a core issue of what's going on right now. And then the next great war in the Middle East is a study of the United States foreign policy in the Middle East. And then it jumps into the whole issue that we've been talking about related to Gog and Magog, the next war, why I believe it is the Gog and Magog war, why I believe Psalm 83 is not a future war, but it's a past war, and why I believe that there is a distinction between the Islamic Antichrist, the War of Armageddon, and the Gog-Magog War. And there's a different book that just zeroes in on this whole issue of Islamic Antichrist called Mistaken Identity. And so if folks are convinced that the Islamic Antichrist is the truth, I would encourage them to read an alternative point of view and know that Joel Richardson and I get along very well, famously, but we disagree on this, and I continue to disagree with him just as strongly as I did a year ago before I knew him.
Mm-hmm. All right, final question. I think you said do your day job. You're a financial analyst.
Actually, I'm a teacher. I teach entrepreneurship at a major university in Oklahoma.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, from that standpoint, whose financial plan do you prefer, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton?
Well, I do believe that cutting taxes is a very good thing. I actually show a slide to my class that over the last 50 years, trickle down economics in fact works. You always see the poor situation improve within a year or two of major tax breaks. And it may not be immediate, but you see a tremendous upturn and a decrease in poverty after tax breaks. So it does work. So I think that's part of the story. And I do believe that waste in government spending is a good idea, that we should cut it back. Regardless of whether or not we can get away with continuing to borrow money from people without any real retribution.
Okay. All right. Well, Doug Woodward, I appreciate you coming on the Edge television broadcast. Now, can we have you on again sometime?
I would love it. I'd love to come back and bring Anthony Patch with me and talk about the new book. We started to do that a couple weeks ago before we ran into thunderstorms and different kinds of technical problems, and that book's a whole lot different than what we talked about tonight, and we're pumped up about talking about that with you.
Well, I'll tell you what, it sounds to me the government was more scared of that broadcast. You know, when they get scared of the broadcast truth coming out, they're going to cut you off, man. I mean,
they're going to cut. That's
why,
right.
That's why Obama handed the internet to the United Nations, so they can just cut everybody off and say the United States didn't do it; they did it. You know, hey,
they did.
Hey,
wanted to pass blame.
Hey, one last thing. Somebody in the live chat wanted to know: are you a doomsday prepper?
I'm actually not. For one thing, I can't afford it, and if I were, I would probably only prep for a few weeks. My view is the preppers, the problem they're going to have if they're Christians is that what are they going to do when people start knocking on the door and saying we're starving to death? Are they going to say, oh, I'm sorry, you didn't prepare, therefore I'm not going to share with you? Well, if they did that, they're probably on the verge of losing their salvation. Not that they could lose their salvation, but that would be a problem.
Okay. All right, Doug Woodward, I appreciate you coming on the program. We'll have you on again sometime.